There's a cliche that I'm sure you guys have heard, which is content is king. And I think to a certain extent, whoever it is that said that was definitely thinking about SharePoint. Or at least, that's what I'm going to go with. Content is king. SharePoint is all about allowing our users to be able to easily access, navigate through, and find the content that they're looking for. Now, in other lessons, we've seen how to do this with search. But in order to make sure that search works, or even to make sure that navigation works, we need to have some level of consistency, that we want to make sure that we've got good metadata. And what we want to take a look at in this lesson is what metadata is all about, and how managed metadata services is going to be one of the key components to ensuring that we have good, clean, consistent metadata. But let's start off by talking about exactly what metadata is. When we're dealing with SharePoint, or when we're dealing with an environment with this much content that we want our users to be able to work with, we need to focus in on how our users are going to find their items. And as it turns out, they're going to do this in a couple of different ways. One way is by browsing for it, that they'll navigate to the site, they'll navigate to the list, they'll navigate to the folder that contains the item or items in question. Now, browsing is good, but browsing has a couple of issues, the biggest of which is that an item can only ever exist in one location. And thus, our users might want to be able to dynamically browse for their items by utilizing the filtering, sorting, and grouping capabilities inside of a list. So that way, if I need to see things grouped together by their status, grouped together by the owner, grouped together by the project, that I can go in and do that. But even to get to that point, I at least need to get down to the list, and I might not even know where an item is at all. And this is where searching comes into play. That I simply go to a search dialog box, type in a couple of keywords, hit submit, and away I go. Now, in order for our filtering and our searching to work, we're going to need good organization and good consistency. We're going to need good metadata. What is metadata? Well, put simply, metadata is data about data. And this would include, among other things, things like the author, the date in which an item was created, the title of the item, the project, the status, the location, etc. Those are all the different pieces of information about an item that are going to be important to me, that are going to give that item meaning, that are going to breathe some level of life into that item. Now, by using that metadata, I'm going to be able to go off and search. So I want to find all items that have been created by Christopher Harrison. I go off and I do a search. Just type in Christopher Harrison, away we go. If I want to, in a list of maybe trouble tickets, be able to group things by status, well, then I'm going to be able to do that. And my status is, again, a piece of metadata. Now, the key to metadata is consistency. And there's really two sides to ensuring consistent metadata: consistent columns and consistent values. Now, in a later lesson, we're going to examine content types and site columns, which will allow us to create columns at the site level and group them together to ensure consistent items, so that way we can have consistent columns. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the managed metadata services, which is going to give us the ability to ensure consistent values. Now, we've got the ability to ensure consistent values in a few different ways. We can do this by using data types. For example, by just simply making sure that something is a number, or making sure that something is a date time, I'm automatically going to get some level of consistency there. It's not a lot, it's still relatively free form, but it's still going to give me some level of consistency. I could also do this with what's known as a lookup column, where what I'll do is I'll create a list somewhere else, and I'll have a column point to that list. The catch, however, with a lookup column is that traditionally, that list is going to need to be inside the same site that we're going to be looking up inside of. Now, we could create choice columns, but the problem with the choice column is that it's going to require a relatively high level of permission to allow somebody to edit values inside of there, and there's not a whole lot of power. That a choice column is just exactly that. It's a list of individual choices. No additional metadata with those choices, no hierarchy, nothing. Just simply choices. And this is where managed metadata comes into play. Now, what we're going to see with managed metadata is that we're going to be able to centralize this, we're going to be able to set up a hierarchy, and we're also going to be able to delegate control. Now, the advantages that our managed metadata brings to the table, number one, is that it's going to be centralized. That managed metadata is a service application, and a service application, by the way, that could be published out to the entire enterprise. So that way we can have an enterprise set of values that could be used. In addition, we also have the ability to utilize a little feature called a content type hub. Content types, as we're going to see in a later lesson, give us the ability to group together site columns and other settings for different types of items. So that way, if I want to ensure that all time off requests, regardless of the site that they happen to be in, are going to be the same, I can do that with a content type and make sure that all of them are going to be the same by publishing it out through my content type hub. Now, managed metadata is also going to give us the ability to set up a taxonomy, which is going to be structured data, where we're going to be in control over the values that you're allowed to choose. And it will also give us a folksonomy, which is going to be free form metadata, and it's going to do that through keywords. Let's take a look at this mystical, magical service that is managed metadata. The first big thing that we want to highlight about managed metadata is its folksonomy capabilities. Folksonomy capabilities are implemented through keywords. Now, the whole thing about a folksonomy is that a folksonomy is where I want to allow my users to add metadata as they see fit. But the problem with the traditional way that we're going to do this, which is just by giving our users a text box, is that that's a bit too freeform, because it allows my users to type in anything that they might want and doesn't give me any level of consistency. So keywords sort of give me a nice happy medium. My user's still able to type in whatever it is they might want, but what's going to happen is that the user's going to see a slightly different interface. And it's an interface that's going to do an autocomplete. So when my user starts typing in a value, they're automatically going to see other values that start with the letters that they've typed in. Now, there's a lot of different places and a lot of different reasons that we may want to do this. One of the biggest is with user profiles and my sites. A user profile is basically a SharePoint public. I don't want to just simply say public because it's only going to be available inside of SharePoint. So we'll say SharePoint public. But it's a SharePoint public page for a particular person. And it's a great way for that person to be able to share information about themselves so that way other people in the enterprise can find them. Now, there's a lot of different skills that a person can have and a lot of different skills that a person's going to want to be able to highlight, but we want to make sure that there's some level of consistency. So if I go into SharePoint and I do a search for people who are good at fill-in skill here, I want to make sure that everybody kept typing in the exact same value. So I don't want some people putting in SP, I don't want some people putting in ShareP, I don't want some people putting in a typo of SharePint. I want to see SharePoint, and I want that to be consistent, but I still want to give my users the ability to type in whatever skill it is they might want. So that way they've got the flexibility to type in maybe, people skills, C#, sales, etc. I don't know all the different skills that people are going to want to be able to type in. I don't know all the different skills that people are going to want to search on, but I know I want it to be consistent. That's exactly what keywords are all about. But there are also going to be times when we want things to be a bit more structured. And this is where taxonomy comes into play. Taxonomy is simply a way of structuring or organizing your data. That if you remember back to biology class, and don't worry, I'm not going to make you say how long ago that was, mostly just because I don't want to admit it. But if you remember back to biology class, you learned a taxonomy with things like kingdom and class and genus and phylum. And what that was all about was structuring all the creatures great and small. Well, the taxonomy in SharePoint is the exact same thing. That it's all about structuring all of our items, great and small. And we want to make sure, again, that we've got consistent values. And so what we can do is we can set up managed term sets. So that way we get to control what items our users are going to be able to type in and select from. And we also have the ability to delegate all of this out. Now, when we set up an MMS implementation, what that's going to do is that's going to set up a term store for us. And our term store is going to contain term groups. Now, our groups give us the ability to, group terms together. Now, the big thing about our term group is that it gives us the ability to delegate control. See, here's the thing. I want to make sure that we've got consistent values. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm not the one responsible for putting all of that data in. If you're anything like me, and I know I am, I don't know what my job title is. I'm a tech person. I don't need to know what my job title is. I show up, I do my work, I leave. And most tech people that I know are the exact same way. They show up, they do their work, they leave. They don't know what their job title is. So if you're now going to put me in charge of putting in all the different job titles, I guarantee you that there's somebody better qualified that can do that. And so what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to delegate that control. And so when I go in and I create a term group, I can delegate that control. Now, our term groups are going to contain term sets. And a term set is going to be a group of terms. Now, a term set is very similar to a column. In fact, typically that's the way that you'll name it, based on the column that you're eventually going to associate that with. So, for example, maybe job title. And then inside of there, I'll have my hierarchy of all of my individual terms. Now, at each one of those levels, I can assign different properties. So, for example, when I create a term group, then what I'm going to be able to do is specify a group name and a description, managers and contributors. Now, managers will be able to contribute values, meaning they'll be able to add, delete, manage them, and they'll also be able to choose contributors. Contributors will simply be able to manage items. They won't be able to choose other contributors, but they'll be able to manage items. Now, if we go one step down, we have a term set. Now, on our term set, we're going to have a name and a description as well. But then we're also going to have official sounding properties, like our owner, our contact, and our stakeholder. Owner, contact, and stakeholder are 100% informational only. That if I make you an owner, if I make you a contact, that does not give you any level of permissions whatsoever to that term set. In addition, on a term set, I can choose a submission policy, open or closed, where open would actually allow end users to add in values as well. Typically, you're going to want closed, but if you do want to open this up, you have that capability. Now, you're also going to notice at the term set level that we can add in some custom properties, which will allow us to add metadata to the term set. But we also get to specify a couple of cool little features on intended use. One thing is whether or not it's going to be available for tagging, whether or not it's going to be available for our users to be able to actually set those terms as metadata for items. And then beyond that, we can also choose whether or not we want to use that term set for navigation, which gives us the ability to manage our navigation and all of our links for a particular site from inside of managed metadata, something which we're going to take a look at in a later lesson. It's a really cool little feature. And then eventually we can get in and create our terms. When we create our terms, we can choose whether or not it's available for tagging. So for example, one of the things that I might do is I might create a job title, which is actually exactly what I'm going to do for my demo, and then set up my first level hierarchy as the department, and then the second level as the actual job title. Well, I don't want you to use the department to tag. I want you to use the job title, that the department is just simply there to help set up my hierarchy. So what I could do is I could take away the tagging, so I can't say that you work in human resources, because that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for what your title is in human resources. So you're recruiter. You're not human resources. We can also choose the language that we're talking about. We can specify a description, and then we can add in what we want the label and other labels or aliases to be for that term. Okay. With all that, what do you say we get in and actually take a look at all this? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up central administration. Now, this is a service application, so I'm going to hit Service Applications, and I'm going to hit New, and I'm going to go to Manage Metadata Service. And I'm going to give this a name very creatively of Manage Metadata Services, and we'll set up a database of SharePoint Manage Metadata, and I'm going to need to use my existing application pool. And then down below, it's going to ask about our content type hub. I'm going to come back to that in a later lesson. So I'm just going to leave that the way that it is for right now, and I'm just simply going to click OK. Okay, now after setting up my managed metadata, I am going to need to start the service. So I'll go to System Settings, Manage Services, and there's our managed metadata, and we just need to make sure that that is started. If it's not, what you'll want to do is just simply hit Start, and you may need to do an IIS reset to actually let it know that it is in fact started. In my case, it's already started, so I'm just going to go back to Application Management. I'm going to go to Manage Service Applications, and I'm going to go on in to my Managed Metadata Services. Now, what you're going to notice inside of here is a couple of real quick things. First of all, and I always like to highlight this right away, is the sample import. That you have the ability to import in metadata. Let's say that I already had a database table that had my job titles, and I just don't want to type all of them in. Well, what you can do is export them and import them in. If you're going to do that, they need to be in a specific format, and that's exactly what that little link will give to you. You're also going to notice we've got our term store administrators, and the big thing that our term store administrators have the ability to do is they have the ability to manage everything inside of managed metadata. So be very careful about choosing who your term store administrators are. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new group here, and let's call this Geek Trainer. And then what you're going to notice on Geek Trainer here is that I've got the ability to set up my managers and my contributors. Now, one of the things that people will sometimes ask at this point is, hey, Christopher, if I go in and I make somebody a manager or I make them a contributor, do I need to allow them access to central administration? And the answer is 100% no. Now, what you can do is just access this straight from a normal SharePoint site. So if I head on over to https://intranet geektrainer.com, and I click my little gear and I go to Site Settings, what you're going to notice if I scroll down just a little bit under Site Administration is I've got my Term Store Administration. And you'll notice they're just reordered, but that's it, that I now have Geek Trainer over there. So it doesn't matter where I am, I can still manage this. So I could be inside my site, I could be inside of Central Administration. Since I'm here, let me just go ahead and keep working inside of here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new term set. You'll notice there's my import. So I'm just going to hit New, and I'm going to give this a name of Job Title. Hit Enter. And then you'll notice, as promised, that we've got our owner, our contact, and our stakeholders. Again, 100% informational only. If I scroll the rest of the way down, you'll notice my submission policy. So if I wanted to allow other people to put those items in, then I could put a little dot next to open. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my terms. Now when I drop this down, you're going to notice that I've got a lot of management capabilities when it comes to my terms. That if I want to be able to reuse them, if I want to be able to move them, if I want to be able to delete them, I've got full management capabilities. Now in my case, I want to get in and start creating them. So I'm going to say create term set. And let's go ahead and set up our department. So let's go ahead and set up sales. And you're going to notice I'm just hitting enter here. That's all that I'm doing. And it will automatically move down to the next line. And so then I could say human resources, hit enter, and then I could say information technology. And again, hit enter. So now that I've got those set up, now what I could do is I could go in and start modifying different properties here. So for example, if I didn't want them to be available for tagging, then all I have to do is take the check away. Now, one of the most important little things here is to make sure that you hit save. It's one of the most common mistakes. So people will go in, they'll make the change, and they won't hit save. Make sure you hit save. So I'm just going to scroll down, have to scroll to the right here because of my resolution, and I'm going to hit save. There we go. And let's do the exact same thing for human resources. No tagging, and save is right there. And then let's do the exact same thing for information technology. Okay. So now that I've got that set up, let me go ahead and add in some job titles here. So let's say for information technology, let's go ahead and create a brand new term. And let's say help desk technician. And let's say administrator. And let's say code monkey. There we go. Now, what we could also do is go back to these terms and add in other labels or aliases as well. So for example, along with code monkey, maybe I could go in and say developer. We'll go ahead and say developer. We'll scroll down, and we'll hit save. Cool. Now, what we've seen up until this point is all the behind-the-scenes stuff. This is how we're going to set up our managed metadata environment. This is going to ensure our consistent values. In a later lesson, we're going to go in and take a look at how to create columns that can use all of those values that we've set up, as well as be able to set up our navigation inside of managed metadata as well. There's how to set up our managed metadata. I'll see you in the next lesson.